It all started with petty fines, fake violation notices, and empty threats. Then they showed up at my door, badges flashing, voices firm, telling me I was under arrest for violating HOA regulations. What they didn't know was that I was a U.S. Marshal, and they just tried to arrest the wrong guy. Let me take you back to the beginning. Before we dive in, let me know where you're watching from. Karen Whitmore, the kind of person who thrived on control, wasn't just a stickler for rules, she lived for them. And when there weren't enough rules to enforce, she created her own. I should have known she'd be a problem the moment I met her, but I had no idea how far she would go to try and control me. It started small. A letter in the mailbox, crisp, with the HOA logo stamped in pretentious gold. Dear homeowner, you are required to register your property under the Oak Ridge HOA and comply with all community guidelines, including monthly dues and maintenance fees. I almost laughed. Required? I'd specifically chosen this place because it wasn't part of any HOA. I flipped to the second page. A fine $250 for failure to maintain property aesthetics. I looked at my yard, freshly cut grass, a clean driveway, my truck parked neatly by the house. What exactly was I failing to maintain? I tossed the letter in the trash and moved on with my day. Then another letter came, and another. By the end of the week, my mailbox was stuffed with violation. Notices, $100, for unauthorized exterior modifications. Nothing had changed. $150 for excessive noise disturbances. I worked late shifts. And $200 for failure to submit a landscaping plan. I didn't even know that was a thing. Karen wasn't just making up violations, she was testing me, seeing if I'd cave. I ignored every single notice. Then she changed tactics. One morning I stepped outside and found her standing in my driveway, clipboard in hand. She didn't look away when I met her eyes. She wanted me to know she was there. I was hoping to catch you, she said, smiling like a predator. Karen, I'm not part of your HOA, I said, my voice low, warning her. She smiled sweetly. Oak Ridge Estates has certain expectations, she said, her voice dripping with fake politeness. I could feel the tension thickening, the air growing heavier with each word. This wasn't just a neighborhood dispute. It was something far more dangerous. And Karen, with her sweet smile, was playing a dangerous game. The next morning, things took a darker turn. I stepped outside to find a pile of garbage dumped on my lawn. It wasn't just some random mess. It was deliberate, designed to send a message. A week later, my mailbox had been knocked over. The whispers started too. Neighbors began giving me sideways glances, muttering behind my back. At first, I thought I was imagining it, until I ran into Sam Callahan at the gas station. Sam was an old-timer who had lived in the neighborhood for years. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it was usually worth listening to. He gave me a sympathetic look as he filled up his truck. Hope you get things sorted out soon, he said, his voice low. Sorted out? I frowned, confused. Sam sighed deeply, glancing over his shoulder. Karen's been telling people you've got legal trouble. Says you're one of those problem homeowners trying to dodge responsibilities. She even mentioned something about a warrant. His eyes narrowed as he met my gaze. You've got to be careful. A warrant. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just petty harassment anymore. This was something much bigger, something more dangerous. I had ignored Karen's violation notices before, but now she was pulling out the big guns. That night, I got a letter marked Final Notice from the Oak Ridge HOA Legal Department. Inside was a bold, official-looking statement. Failure to comply with HOA policies will result in legal action. Please be advised that a warrant has been issued for your continued refusal to adhere to community guidelines. I stared at the paper, my heart racing. Karen had finally lost her mind. She actually thought she could scare me with a fake warrant. It was laughable, but deep down something twisted in my gut. This wasn't just about HOA rules anymore. Karen had crossed a line. She was playing a game she couldn't win. I tossed the letter aside, my mind racing. She was getting desperate, escalating things. The next time she tried something, she was going to regret it. Because what Karen didn't know was that she'd just picked a fight with the wrong person. I wasn't just any homeowner. I was a U.S. Marshal. And I wasn't about to back down. A week later, things escalated even further. I stepped outside one morning to find my yard littered with garbage, bags, fast food wrappers and empty bottles, all deliberately strewn across the lawn. It was an act of defiance, a message from Karen, meant to provoke and intimidate. The following week, I walked out to find my mailbox had been knocked over, its contents scattered across the driveway. This wasn't just petty retaliation anymore. It was harassment at a whole new level. Then the whispers began. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But then I ran into Sam Callahan, a longtime neighbor at the local gas station. Sam was a man of few words, but when he spoke, you listened. He shot me a sympathetic look as he filled his truck. "Hope you get things sorted out soon," he muttered, his tone low. "Sorted out?" I frowned, confused by his comment. Sam sighed heavily, clearly reluctant to say more. "Karen's been telling people you've got legal trouble," he said, glancing around. "She's spreading rumors. Says you're one of those problem homeowners who's trying to dodge responsibility. Mentioned something about a warrant, too. You need to watch your back." "A warrant?" My heart sank. It was one thing to deal with fake fines and threats, but now she was playing with the big guns. I felt the pressure building in my chest, a heavy sense of dread creeping in. I had ignored Karen's fake violation notices before, but now she was making things personal. The next day, I got another letter, this one marked, "Final Notice," from the Oak Ridge HOA Legal Department. Inside, the words were bold and menacing. "Failure to comply with HOA policies will result in legal action. Please be advised that a warrant has been issued for your continued refusal to adhere to community guidelines." I stared at the letter in disbelief. She was actually trying to scare me with a fake warrant. I laughed out loud, but there was a chill running down my spine. This wasn't just about HOA rules anymore. Karen had crossed the line from petty harassment to full-blown legal fraud, and she had no idea who she was dealing with. I let out a slow breath. It was time to make her regret this, because what Karen didn't know, what she couldn't possibly understand, was that I was a U.S. Marshal, and I wasn't going down without a fight. The next morning, I woke up to find a red warning notice taped to my front door. It was like a mock execution order. "Failure to pay. Outstanding fines will result in arrest." My stomach twisted as I read the words. Karen was trying harder than ever to push me, thinking that her fake threats would make me bend. But something in me snapped. This wasn't just about some HOA rules anymore. This was about power, control, and trying to break me. I had no idea just how far Karen was willing to go until the next day, when I found two men standing in my driveway. They wore ill-fitting uniforms, cheap plastic badges clipped to their belts, and carried clipboards like they were real authorities. The taller man, Mark Stevens, looked me over with a smirk on his face. The shorter one, Greg Miller, shifted nervously on his feet. It was the typical intimidation tactic, but I wasn't intimidated. "Are you the homeowner here?" Mark asked, trying to sound official. I folded my arms, already knowing this was about to get interesting. "Who's asking?" "We're with the Homeowners Association Enforcement Division," Greg said, his voice shaking a little. "We're here to discuss your outstanding violations." I almost laughed. "HOA Enforcement Division?" I scoffed. "You're kidding me, right?" Mark raised an eyebrow, his eyes narrowing. "We have an active warrant for your arrest. You've failed to comply with community regulations, and you're being brought in." At that moment, I could feel the anger boiling in my veins. Furious rage surged through me as I realized what they were doing, trying to intimidate me with a fake warrant. It was laughable, but I couldn't let this go. "Let's see the warrant, then," I said, my voice calm, but there was steel behind it. Mark hesitated. "You already got the notice," he said, confused. "No," I shook my head. "The real one. Show me a court-issued arrest warrant." They both paused, clearly uncomfortable with the question. The silence stretched and the tension was suffocating. Finally, I reached into my back pocket and pulled out my U.S. Marshal badge. The moment they saw it, their faces drained of color. "You just tried to arrest a federal officer," I said, my voice low. Mark's clipboard hit the ground and Greg turned, bolting down the street. I didn't chase them. I just stood there, feeling the weight of the moment settle over me. Karen had just crossed a line she didn't even know existed. The moment those two men bolted down the street, I knew things were about to get even bigger. I didn't let them get far. I ran their names through the system, digging deeper than I had before. The truth hit me like a punch to the gut. These weren't just random fake cops. They were part of something much more elaborate. Karen wasn't just faking violations. She was running an organized scheme, using fake citations and arrest threats to intimidate homeowners who refused to join her. Joy, but that wasn't the worst part. I dug further into public complaints and HOA records, and the full extent of her plan started to unfold before me. Karen had been preying on homeowners who refused to sign up for her HOA, using fabricated fines to force them into submission. The tactic was simple: intimidate, escalate, and, if necessary, seize their properties. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Karen had taken it to another level, and people had already lost their homes. It was a scam on a scale I couldn't ignore. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became. There was more to this than just fake fines and made-up violations. Karen had been running a full-blown extortion racket, and what she didn't know was that I wasn't just some homeowner she could push around. I was Jack Porter, a U.S. Marshal, and I was about to put an end to this. But I needed to see just how far she'd go. So I baited her. I took one of her final notice letters, made it look like I was giving in, and sent a formal request for a hearing. I played my part, letting her believe I was afraid. The next day, I received an email summoning me to an official HOA arbitration hearing. It wasn't at a courthouse, though. It was in some dingy community center. That's when I knew I had her. She had set the stage for a fake trial, and I was walking right into it. I smiled to myself. Karen was about to make her biggest mistake yet. I had every intention of exposing her. And with a little help from the law, it wouldn't take much longer. She had crossed the line, and the stakes were about to get very real. The day of the fake arbitration hearing arrived, and I walked into the rented community center with a sense of purpose. Karen was already sitting at the head of a long conference table, her clipboard in front of her like some kind of mock judge. Behind her, the 3 HOA board members, Linda Mitchell, Paul Richardson, and Edward Lee, sat in silence, their eyes darting nervously between each other. They didn't have a clue what was about to hit them. Across from them were 2 homeowners I recognized. People Karen had tried to intimidate before. They looked uncomfortable, clearly out of their depth in this charade. Karen flashed me a smile, one that was far too confident. "I'm glad you could make it," she said, gesturing to an empty chair. I didn't respond immediately. I took my time, sitting down slowly, folding my hands, making her wait. I was in control now, as Karen launched into her speech, rattling off a list of fabricated violations and inflated fines. I couldn't help but watch her. Every time she glanced at her paperwork, her eyes flickered with anxiety. She was rushing through the details, trying to make everything sound official. Her voice was fast, almost frantic. She was stalling. The tension in the room was palpable. I could feel it in my bones, like a pressure building ready to explode. I leaned back in my chair, a smile tugging at my lips. "Let me guess," I interrupted, cutting her off mid-sentence. "The HOA police are on their way to escort me out of here." The silence that followed was deafening. Linda shifted uncomfortably. Paul looked down at his lap, avoiding my gaze. Karen's eyes flickered toward the door, and I knew I had her. I stood up slowly, letting the silence stretch just a little longer. "Before they get here," I said, my voice calm but sharp, "why don't we call in some real legal professionals?" Right on cue, the doors burst open. Uniformed officers flooded into the room, and the look on Karen's face turned ghostly white. The board members froze, their faces pale. The assistant U.S. attorney, a woman with no time for HOA scams, stepped forward. "Karen Whitmore," she said, unfolding an arrest warrant. "You are under arrest for fraud, extortion, impersonation of law enforcement, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud." Karen's mouth opened and closed, her face contorting with disbelief. "Wait, you don't understand," she shrieked. "Oh, we understand," I said, crossing my arms. "You just tried to hold a fake legal hearing to steal property from homeowners." The room erupted as Karen was cuffed and dragged out. The moment she was out of sight, the neighbors who had watched in stunned silence started murmuring, their disbelief turning to anger. They had no idea how deep the lies had gone, but now they did. And Karen had lost everything. The fallout from Karen's arrest spread like wildfire. News broke, and suddenly the entire neighborhood was buzzing. People who had been blindly following her and paying fines they didn't, who now found themselves in a frenzy. They were demanding answers, questioning where their money had gone, and realizing the true extent of the scam. It wasn't just about fines or rules. It was organized theft. I couldn't help but feel a surge of ultimate satisfaction as I watched it all unfold. Karen, who had once ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist, was now being publicly humiliated. Her name was being dragged through the mud, and it was all coming down around her. She had spent years terrorizing people, making their lives miserable with fake violations and extortion. Now she was the one being dragged out in cuffs, the one facing the consequences. And as her fake courtroom crumbled, so did her empire. I sat back and watched the chaos. People who had been too scared to speak out for years were now coming forward, sharing their stories. One couple revealed that Karen had tried to force them to sell their house for a non-existent unpaid debt. Another homeowner had been harassed relentlessly, paying thousands in bogus fines just to avoid the constant pressure. It was all unraveling, and I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of triumph. Overwhelming victory washed over me as I realized how much justice had been done. Within days, the entire HOA board was under investigation. Within a week, the HOA was officially dissolved. All those fake fines, all the threats of eviction were wiped away. Homeowners were refunded, and Karen's reign of terror was over. She was facing felony charges: fraud, wire fraud, extortion, and impersonation of law enforcement. The case was airtight. The sense of relief that washed over me was immense. The neighborhood was free from Karen's grip, and I could finally enjoy the peace that had been taken from me for so long. The neighborhood wasn't the same, but for the first time it was mine again. As I walked past Karen's now empty house, a smile tugged at my lips. It was over. She had underestimated me, and in the end, the law had caught up with her. The aftermath was nothing short of a spectacle. Karen's arrest sent shockwaves through the neighborhood, and as word spread, the true scope of her deceit became impossible to ignore. People who had spent years paying off fake fines and living in fear of her threats began to piece together the puzzle. Neighbors who had once been too afraid to speak out now demanded answers. They wanted to know where their money had gone and how they had been so easily manipulated. As the truth came to light, the sense of extreme tension that had plagued the neighborhood for so long finally began to dissipate. People shared their own experiences, stories of forced sales, bogus fines, and the mental toll Karen's actions had taken on them. The more they uncovered, the more it became clear that Karen's scam had been a carefully orchestrated criminal enterprise. It wasn't just petty rule enforcement anymore. It was theft on a grand scale. For the first time in years, the pressure that had hung over the neighborhood like a dark cloud seemed to lift. The homeowners who had been taken advantage of started getting their money back. The HOA, which had once wielded so much power over their lives, was dismantled, its corrupt leaders under investigation. I couldn't help but feel a deep, overwhelming sense of satisfaction. Karen had believed she was untouchable, that her position within the HOA gave her immunity. But in the end, she had underestimated the lengths I would go to expose her. The law had caught up with her, and she was finally paying the price for her actions. With each passing day, the community started to heal. The constant tension that had kept everyone on edge was gone. People began to rebuild their lives, free from the weight of Karen's cruel manipulation. As I walked past her now vacant house, I felt a wave of triumph. It was over. Karen had lost everything: her power, her reputation, and her freedom. And as I looked around at the peaceful neighborhood, I realized that this victory was more than just a personal triumph. It was justice finally served. Karen Whitmore's arrest was just the beginning. As the news spread like wildfire, the community was in disbelief. But soon the anger began to build. Neighbors who had been quietly paying off fake fines, who had been too terrified to question Karen before, were now speaking up. They started to share their stories. Stories of wrongful evictions, of homes nearly lost to fabricated debts, of endless harassment. And as the truth came to light, so did the overwhelming scope of Karen's criminal scheme. The tension that had hung over the neighborhood for so long was finally beginning to break. People began demanding refunds for the money they had been forced to pay under false pretenses. HOA fees were challenged, fines were overturned, and the entire board of corrupt officials who had supported Karen's reign was under investigation. The entire HOA was disbanded, its power stripped away. It was a moment of ultimate satisfaction, knowing that the community had been freed from Karen's grasp. She had thought she could get away with it. She had thought her position in the HOA made her untouchable. But in the end, Karen's world crumbled, and she was left with nothing but the consequences of her actions. As the dust settled, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. For so long I had been in the eye of the storm, battling an unseen enemy. But now, as Karen was facing felony charges for fraud, extortion, and impersonating law enforcement, it felt like a victory not just for me, but for everyone who had been affected. I had exposed her for what she was, and now the law was catching up to her. The community was healing. The fear, the constant anxiety, the whispers in the streets, gone. People were beginning to trust each other again, and the air felt lighter, freer. As I walked past Karen's now empty house, I couldn't help but feel a sense of overwhelming victory. The neighborhood that she had terrorized for so long was finally free, and I had been the one to make it happen. Justice had been served and Karen had paid the price. It was over, and for the first time in a long while, I could breathe easy again. Karen Whitmore's fall from grace was complete. The HOA that she had so meticulously built to control and manipulate others was now a thing of the past. The board members who had once backed her were now scattered, facing their own investigations. The house she had ruled from was empty, stripped of any power and soon to be sold. The people who had once feared her now stood taller, free from the weight of her threats and deceit. As I walked past her abandoned home, a sense of ultimate satisfaction washed over me. I had watched her terrorize this neighborhood for so long, using her fake authority to strip people of their homes and money. But now it was all over. Justice had been served. Karen had been arrested and charged with a laundry list of crimes: fraud, extortion, impersonating law enforcement, and wire fraud. The law had finally caught up with her, and it felt good. No, it felt great. For the first time in what felt like forever, the neighborhood was peaceful. No more fake fines, no more harassing letters, no more whispers behind closed doors. The people who had been affected by Karen's actions were starting to rebuild their lives, to trust again. The sense of defiance I had felt when I first stood up to Karen had transformed into a profound sense of relief. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the community. In the end, I realized this wasn't just a victory for me. It was a victory for everyone who had been oppressed by Karen's reign. It was a reminder that even when things seem impossible, there's always a way to fight back, to stand up for what's right. And Karen, she had been the one who underestimated me, the one who thought she could hide behind her false authority. She learned the hard way that no one, not even someone with so much power, is untouchable. Now, as I stood in front of the house that had once been her fortress, I couldn't help but smile. This was the moment of overwhelming victory. I had won and the neighborhood had won. Finally, the wait was gone. The people were free, and justice had been done.